The rain hammered against the windows of Peterson's auto repair like bullets from heaven, each drop exploding into 1,000 smaller pieces before sliding down the glass. Inside the cramped garage, Jake Martinez wiped his grease-stained hands on an even greasier rag, squinting through the dim fluorescent lighting at the engine block that had been giving him hell for the past 3 hours. "Son of a gun," he muttered, pushing his worn baseball cap back on his head. 22 years he'd been turning wrenches, and this vintage 1967 Shelby GT 500 was proving to be one ornery beast. The engine had more problems than a politician during election season, and Jake was starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he'd finally met his match. That's when she walked in. The bell above the door chimed like church bells on Sunday morning, and Jake looked up to see a woman who seemed to have stepped right out of a magazine. She wore a sharp black business suit that probably cost more than Jake made in 3 months, her auburn hair pulled back in a neat bun that said "I mean business." Her heels clicked against the oil-stained concrete floor like a metronome keeping time to some expensive symphony. "You Jake Martinez?" she asked, her voice carrying the kind of confidence that came from boardrooms and corner offices. "Guilty as charged," Jake replied, setting down his socket wrench. "Though I gotta warn you, lady, if you're looking to get your car detailed or something, you might want to try the fancy place downtown. This here's a working garage." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that could melt butter on a cold January morning. "I'm not here for a detail job. I'm Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Automotive Industries." Jake's eyebrows shot up like rockets on the 4th of July. Sterling Automotive was the biggest car manufacturer on the West Coast, the kind of company that made headlines in the Wall Street Journal. What in tarnation was their CEO doing in his little grease monkey palace? "Ma'am," Jake said, suddenly feeling underdressed in his coveralls, "I think you might have the wrong place. I fix pickup trucks and family sedans, not million-dollar sports cars." Victoria walked over to the Shelby, running her manicured fingers along its cherry red paint job. "This beauty here? She's mine. Well, was my grandfather's, technically. Sterling Automotive's founder, Thomas Sterling. This was his pride and joy, the car that inspired him to start the company back in the day." Jake scratched his head, leaving a small smudge of motor oil on his temple. "Your granddad had good taste, I'll give him that. But I gotta tell you, this engine's got more issues than a soap opera. I've been at it for hours, and I'm starting to think she might be beyond saving." "That's where you're wrong, Mr. Martinez," Victoria said, her green eyes sparkling with something between mischief and determination. "See, I've heard things about you. Word around town is that you're some kind of miracle worker when it comes to engines. They say you can make a dead motor purr like a kitten with nothing but elbow grease and pure stubbornness." Jake felt his cheeks redden like a sunset over the desert. "Folks tend to exaggerate, ma'am." "Do they?" Victoria pulled out her smartphone and showed him a news article. "Says here you fixed Mayor Thompson's '72 Camaro that 3 other mechanics said was a lost cause. And what about Mrs. Henderson's Volkswagen bus that caught fire? You had that thing running again in 2 days flat." "Well, I suppose." Jake started, but Victoria held up her hand. "Here's the deal, Mr. Martinez. This car means everything to me. It's not just about the money or the sentimental value. Sterling Automotive is launching a new vintage restoration division next month, and this Shelby is supposed to be our flagship showcase. Without it, the whole project falls apart, and I stand to lose about $20 million in investments." Jake let out a low whistle. "20 million? That's more zeros than I can count without taking my boots off." Victoria laughed, and the sound was like wind chimes on a summer evening. "The thing is, I've already had 5 different mechanics look at this engine." 5. each one more expensive than the last, and each one told me the same thing. It's impossible to fix without completely rebuilding the motor from scratch, which would take 6 months and cost a fortune. She walked closer to Jake, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something fancy and French, no doubt. But I don't believe in impossible, Mr. Martinez. I built Sterling Automotive from a 2-person operation into a billion-dollar company by refusing to accept impossible as an answer. Jake nodded slowly, his mind already turning over the possibilities. He'd taken a good look at that engine earlier, and while it was certainly a challenge, he had a few ideas percolating in the back of his brain like coffee on a Sunday morning. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Miss Sterling?" Victoria's smile grew wider, and she glanced around the garage like she was about to share state secrets. "I'll tell you what, Mr. Martinez. If you can get this engine running smooth as silk by tomorrow evening, and I mean really running, not just coughing and sputtering, I'll make you an offer that'll change your life forever." "What kind of offer?" Victoria's eyes twinkled with mischief. "If you fix this engine, I'll marry you," she said with a laugh that echoed through the garage. "How's that for motivation?" Jake nearly dropped his wrench. "Ma'am, I think you might have hit your head on something. You don't even know me from Adam." "Oh, I'm just pulling your leg, Mr. Martinez," Victoria said, still chuckling. "But I am serious about one thing. If you can fix this engine, I'll offer you a position as head of our new restoration division. 6-figure salary, full benefits, your own team of mechanics, and all the vintage cars you can handle. What do you say?" Jake looked at the Shelby, then at Victoria, then back at the engine. His whole life had been about taking things apart and putting them back together, making the broken whole again. This was just another puzzle, albeit one with higher stakes than usual. "All right, Miss Sterling," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "You got yourself a deal. But I'm gonna need some coffee, a few hours of silence, and maybe a miracle or two." Victoria clapped her hands together like a kid on Christmas morning. "That's the spirit. I'll be back tomorrow at 6 o'clock sharp. Don't let me down, Mr. Martinez." As she clicked her way back to the door, she paused and looked over her shoulder. "And Jake? Call me Victoria. After all, we might be business partners soon." After she left, Jake stood alone in the garage with nothing but the rain, the humming fluorescent lights, and one stubborn Shelby GT 500 for company. He walked over to his toolbox, selected his favorite trench, the one his daddy had given him when he first started working on cars, and got to work. The hours ticked by like molasses in January. Jake pulled apart fuel injectors, tested spark plugs, cleaned carburetors, and checked compression ratios. He discovered a cracked distributor cap, a clogged fuel filter, and timing that was off by about 3 degrees. Each problem he solved revealed 2 more, like a mechanical hydra that grew new heads every time he cut one off. By 3 in the morning, Jake's back ached like he'd been hit by a freight train, and his eyes burned from staring at tiny engine parts. But something deep in his gut told him he was close. Real close. That's when he found a hairline crack in the engine block itself, so small and well hidden that it would take a magnifying glass and a flashlight to spot it. But Jake had been doing this long enough to know that sometimes the biggest problems came in the smallest packages. He spent the next 4 hours carefully welding the crack, grinding down the excess metal, and reassembling everything with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. When the sun finally peeked through the garage windows, Jake wiped the sweat from his forehead and turned the key. The engine roared to life like a lion waking up from a long nap, purring with a deep, throaty growl that made Jake's heart sing. At 6 o'clock on the dot, Victoria Sterling walked through that door again, this time wearing jeans and a casual blouse that made her look more human and somehow even more beautiful. "Well?" she asked, her voice barely containing her excitement. Jake just smiled and handed her the keys. "Why don't you tell me?" Victoria slid behind the wheel, turned the key, and the Shelby responded with a perfect, powerful roar. She revved the engine a few times, listening to its smooth, steady rhythm, then stepped out of the car with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Martinez," she said, "I believe I made you a promise about marriage." Jake laughed and shook his head. "Well, ma'am, I reckon I'll settle for the job offer instead." And that's how Jake Martinez, humble mechanic, fixed an impossible engine and found himself the head of Sterling Automotive's restoration division. Though some folks around town still swear Victoria Sterling would have made good on that marriage proposal if he'd asked.